tonight with a few words from Safia Bendelli, who is the director of the Center for Women's Development at the college. And then I would like to introduce our moderator for tonight in a moment. So thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to extend a welcome to all of you, those of you who are here because it's a class requirement, and those of you who are here because you're interested in the subject. I think the main thing I want you to remember is that there is a Center for Women's Development here at the college, that it exists to help women and men to get through the college, that we want everybody to get their academic degree and to finish having skills, but also more importantly, as importantly, knowledge. So each month, Women's History Month, we sponsor a series of events. This is perhaps the 5th in the series. And the gold calendar that you have lists the others. Now we know it's particular activities, but this participation is very, very important. So whether you're here as a requirement, as my Women's Studies class members are required to attend Women's History Month events, or whatever, the point is you're going to get some really good information about women in psychology. It's also very important to understand that when our center sponsors events, because we're a center that deals primarily with people of color, we operate from that perspective, that our worldview is one of a people of color worldview, which is a holistic one. So when we talk about a women's center, we are in fact talking about a people center that understands the specific particularities that affect women. And that's what we mean, that we serve all people. So the theme for Women's History Month 1991 is nurturing tradition, fostering change. And this is what we do well as women, as people of color, nurture tradition and foster change, because we must do both things. We have wonderful traditions, but also we have to foster change. So as you listen tonight, you can keep that in mind, the theme, and also your own understanding and your own commitment to your education, to your personal development, or to whatever. That is about getting information and having knowledge and understanding to change your lives, to become empowered. So on behalf of the Center for Women's Development, I'd like to thank you and welcome you again to the forum. Thank you.
Before we begin, I'd just like to say a few words about the purpose of tonight's symposium. We're trying to bring together women who are psychologists to talk about their lives, their work, and some of their viewpoints about psychology. I think you'll find it a very exciting panel tonight. We've tried to arrange it, if you look at your program, as point counterpoint. That is to say, we have on the one hand someone who's going to talk about women as nurturers, on the other hand someone who's going to talk about child abuse and neglect. And I think you'll see a potential for controversy and interesting discussion as we go through the night's deliberations. I would like now to introduce our moderator for tonight, who is Roxanne Fraser. She's a junior at Medgar Evers College, a member of the Psychology Club. She has presented research that she's done at the annual Social Science Research Symposium at John Jay and Fordham this year, investigating the public's point of view or attitude toward building a mall at the Prospect Park subway. She will be introducing our various speakers and moving the program along throughout the evening. And I'd like to welcome Roxanne Fraser.
Thank you. Our first speaker is Dr. Joyce Johnson. She is a community psychologist. She received her BS in Community Health Education at Hunter College, School of Health Science, her master's in Public Health in Population and Family Health at Community University School of Public Health, and her doctorate in philosophy in community psychology at Michigan State University. She has taught at the College of New Rochelle, St. Peter's College, Michigan State University, and York College. She was also an academic advisor at the Academic Advisement Center. Dr. Johnson has also worked with the Manhattan Teen Pregnancy Network, where she was the director. She served as Chief Executive Officer and worked with the Downstate Medical Center and Caribbean House Family Planning Clinic as a health educator. She also served as a community liaison worker. She has a 3-year-old daughter. Her title today is Women as Nurturers.
about this whole issue of women as nurturers, and in the process I put together a paper that I put together a paper that that is still in process. So even feedback that I get here, I'd like to maybe contribute to a more finished product. So I'm going to stand. Okay, I'm going to read some of what I've done. Just considering the whole issue of women as nurturers, I think this is an important issue because it encourages women's own self-identity, meaning that we don't have to think of ourselves only as students or as academicians, but as women and as workers, women students, and all of what that contributes to who we are. I'd like to invite you to journey with me through my own process over the last 13 years, as I've come to appreciate the role that I have had and continue to have as a nurturer of women. I think of nurturing others in three ways. One way is giving information, displaying information. Another way is giving attention and direction. And another way is giving on a spiritual plane, in a spiritual realm. Just think of those three frameworks. I don't know if it's helpful to put on the board and teach it, but just think of those three frameworks or three threads as I continue this discussion. Women giving information, women giving attention and direction, and women on a spiritual realm giving spiritually. Okay, even though this topic is about women as nurturers, our society does support, and men can attest to, that men do nurture too, and we do want to support that idea. For some, to focus on women and nurturing may seem like an outdated idea. So we've always talked about women in the house, women cooking and cleaning and caring for the children, and that's the way we've traditionally thought of the role of women in the society. And there are many areas in which women give and care for others and feed others and birth others, and all of us are familiar with that. But much of the last century has been spent on taking women out of these traditional roles and developing them. We want to, we'd say, the women's liberation and the feminists, and this is not contra or anti, and when we get the total picture, it kind of works together. But maybe in the early parts of the movement, a lot of the emphasis was on moving outside of those traditional roles and let's get women out of the house and get them into the job market. And sometimes it meant that there was a split, and we had our house role and we had our production role or our market role. And what we're suggesting is that, or what I'm suggesting is a framework for thinking about women as taking that total self of who they are in that nurturing role and just operating from that nurturing center and working with that in the production lines, in whatever business areas that you choose. This is open for questioning as we go, or shall I just sort of give my whole piece and then, because I don't know how it's received. Okay. All right. In considering my own career development, and Roxanne talked about how I've gone from a public health orientation to a community psychology orientation. I've nurtured others on a few different levels or arenas. My work in public health included helping and caring for the individual. As a health educator, I nurtured others by giving information. It was my job to go into the communities and talk about family planning and giving information about birth control. It was my job to go into homes and talk about immunization and why you need to get your DPT and polio up to the individual then therefore to take that information and get the shot, to take that information and recognize the risk of getting the shot, but they had to make their own judgments. It was only my job to be that objective other and give the information. That's how I nurtured. Okay, that was my nurturing role as a health educator and in the family planning arena. I was giving facts, plain and unadulterated. And the receiving person was left with having to use the information to make changes regarding the health and illness state. We can take that same model and think about, grade 1 when we were in school and had to give and learn from our teachers ABCs and all that. And from grade, even, Psych 1, a lot of what we do in Psych 1 is we have to know the facts and we have to put them down, we have to learn them. The teacher gives information, the educator gives information. A lot of us are in teacher training, we're giving information to people, and that is a nurturing role. Okay. So as teachers and educators, our first line of interaction is giving information. But the next level is not just that the person receives the information, but they do something else with it. They make some kind of analysis or interpretation, or they do something creative with that information. So that's the two ways of, there are levels of what you do with that nurturing figure who's giving you that information. Let's also think about nurturing as women, not giving information, not just to give information, but also women shaping and orienting people. Now, as women, we're always doing that, as parents in particular, as mothers. We see ourselves as disciplining, as having ideas about how people are supposed to be. As parents, we want our children to do certain things in their lives, and we orient our thinking and direct our behavior towards them towards that end. And women as nurturers are doing that, are orienting, and that's our second framework, giving attention and direction to a person. Parenting is a prime example of women giving and birthing others, and by birthing is that same quality of interaction, giving attention and direction and having probably a goal or a framework. Sometimes we're too specific and it just doesn't work for the person, but to know the person, to have totally received them, is to also have a framework for how you want them to be. Vocationally, this has meant that women have been involved in social services at many levels to express this aspect of nurturance. Okay, and so when we think of social service from the idea of dealing with the individual on the most intimate level as in a therapeutic relationship, and dealing with the individual as an aggregate, as in a sort of in a program development, idea, we have that whole idea of nurturing still being carried out. And it's all, it's the same. We all come with, even at every level, we're coming with an idea of what direction we want the individual to the groups of individuals, or the targeted persons that we have, what we want them to be, or how we want them to grow, or what direction we want them to go in. The same mode as mother caring for the child, the same mode. Okay, now, moving to a third plane, this is the third framework I have, which is women on the spiritual realm, which is basically, and it's sort of, if we think about maybe older women in our own experiences in our own lives, who have been examples of praying women, or women who have given their attention to God, and we look at them, and sometimes we don't know their effect, but we are drawn to them, especially sometimes in crises, or we think about them in crises, or we think about the Lord or the God to whom they are worshiping and serving, and we think about, we go through Scripture and we think about people like Sarah, and think about Esther, who prayed for her people, and think about Naomi, who prayed for her family, and that we think about Mary, who prayed against all the customs and the rituals of that time, and we recognize that women on a spiritual realm are nurturing others just because of who they are and how they have drawn themselves and their attention to their Lord and their God. And at that point, it's not so much what the person is giving directly, but how they've oriented their own selves and their own lives. So, and I'm sure many of us can relate to that from our own experiences and people that we've known, and how they've been drawn to their churches and to their Lord and to serving each other. And that's a nurturing model. So we have it on 3 different levels in summary, just so we know that we're coming back to something. Is women giving information, women giving information towards giving information, women giving, second one?
Attention and direction.
Right, very good. And the women giving of the spiritual realm. And that, maybe gives us a way to think about ourselves as women in our vocation as psychologists, or however we see ourselves in social science field.
Action.
Action, yes.
Okay. What exactly are the requirements to become a community psychologist?
Well, it's a PhD in psychology with a focus in community psychology. Yes. You're getting a bachelor's in psychology. That's the background for that, and they have a master's and a PhD that if you're interested in pursuing MSU as a possibility. Your bachelor's, would be the first start, and then explore the graduate program.
Johnson? Yeah, is there a different approach to nurturing opposed from if you were going to nurture another woman or another man? What would be the difference if you the approach? Yeah.
What I try to do is sort of give you an idea, and I think I sort of address myself more to women, but to give a framework for just giving a positive identity to who we are in any situation. And in terms of how you deal with men versus women, if you think about just each person comes from a different framework or has a different life experience, has a different problem, has a different way of communicating. And if you think of just receiving and understanding that person in the total of who he or she is, it becomes maybe less of a question of sex as much as a question of accepting a person for who they are. Am I answering the question? No.
Well, like if you were nurturing a woman, what I'm saying is that you're trying to enhance her womanhood or whatever. Now, how would that, like if you were trying to nurture a man, how could you? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, yes, you can. Yes, please.
I think that one of the functions of nurturing is that it's life fostering. I'm going to talk a little bit about it in my talk, but whatever helps somebody to develop within their own context to become more of themselves, I think would be nurturing if I'm not overseeing myself. Okay. So in that sense, you would really nurture a man and a woman in the same way because you're encouraging them to grow.
That's good because our next speaker is Abena Santoa. Did you get that? No. A-B-E-N-A.
Look at me, thank you. It's on their page.
It's on the table. It's ridiculous.
Okay. Dr. Santua is currently a consultant of psychotherapist with her own private practice. She obtained her bachelor's in psychology from Mills College, her master's in clinical psychology from Adelphi University, and her doctor of philosophy, also in clinical psychology, from Adelphi University. She has been an instructor at the College of New Rochelle, Medgar Evers College, Downstate Medical Center, and University of New York. Dr. Santua is the staff psychologist at Bedford-Stuyvesant and director of the Urban Women's Shelter and the Howard Thurman Listening Group. Dr. Santua has written an article entitled African Psychology, the Second Generation, Putting the Theory into Practice, and a book, Free Your Mind, Introduction of African Psychology, Reclaiming Our Strength, Incorporating African Values in Psychotherapy, was mentioned at the National Conference of the Association of Black Psychologists. Our topic today is the feminine influence in psychology.
For everybody that didn't hear the name clearly, it's Abena Asantewa. And I'll tell you how I got my name, which is going to go a little bit into how I see women. I was given my name by one of the kings of the Ashanti tribe, and I was named after Ya Asantewa, who was the queen mother of the Ashanti tribe in Ghana. And at the turn of the century, when the British were coming to chop up Africa, basically, the Germans were taking one piece and the British were taking another piece, and the French were getting Senegal and different countries. They came to Ghana and they were going to colonized the Ashanti, and they had taken their king and exiled him to the Seychelles Islands around on the other side of Africa, and they were about to take their golden stool, which to the Ashanti was the soul of their culture, and all the people were really feeling depressed and downtrodden, and they were about to give up. And Ya Santewa, who was the queen mother of the village of Ajisu, went around to the villages, and she reminded the men in particular of their proud heritage that they had as Ashanti, that they were warrior people that had gone and they had colonized and they had civilized for thousands of years. And she said, how dare you let these people come in and take our culture? You're going to just stand there and let them conquer us? If you men won't fight, I will get the women together and we will conquer the British. And since the men could not let the women stand in front of them like that, she rallied them around, and the Ashanti were never conquered. So they named some wars after Ya Santewa. There's a proverb in the Twi language that's part of the Adinkra symbols, and the symbol is called Sankofa, and it is represented by a proverb that says there's no harm in going back to the old when the new is not working properly. And it's my feeling that we've gotten very confused about womanhood. Women are very hostile feeling, isolated. Folks are really unclear as to what is happening in terms of sexuality these days. So what I'm suggesting is that we go back to the wisdom of our ancestors, who had very clear understanding of the principles that govern the universe. And they understood that everything in creation is made out of the interplay of the masculine and the feminine principle. And it doesn't mean the same that we usually think about masculine and feminine in terms of maleness and femaleness, so I want to explain it a little bit. The masculine principle is everything in nature that is outward moving, that projects energy, that's light, that is positive in the sense that the positive pole of a battery emits energy. It moves outward. The feminine principle, it's dark, it's inward, it operates in a circular motion, and it's negative in the sense that the negative pole of a battery receives energy and attracts energy to itself. And in order for anything to be created, there has to be a masculine and a feminine principle in operation. And what we're suffering from, as I can see it in this society, is a lopsided value system which only values the masculine and devalues the active principles that the feminine quality has. As I was thinking about this and going back over my textbooks, I was trying to look up feminine in my textbooks, and all I found feminine connected with, when I did find it, was passive. And with obviously a connotation that it wasn't very good to be that. And I think that one of the things that happened, some wonderful things happened during the women's liberation movement, but one of the things that did happen was that all of the characteristics, the nurturing, which you mentioned earlier, that have historically been connected with women were devalued. And so anything that a woman did was considered not to be of particular worth. And how you got worth was to do the things that men did. And what's ended up happening is that we have a very lopsided society now, and some of the problems that we're seeing with our children, this generation coming up, I think really has to do with the fact that the women have not been playing that nurturing role in the family and attending to some of the things that the family needed that women are more naturally attuned to doing. Some examples of the feminine principle. I want to be clear that since it's a feminine principle and not a feminine person, there is masculine and feminine in everybody. But the sex that a person has, their physical appearance represents kind of the loading or the amount of whichever of these principles is most predominant in them, which can be seen by our bodies and by our sexual organs. The man's organs are outward moving, the woman's are internal and hidden. In the course of procreation, a man's seed goes outward, it is deposited. The woman receives it, she nurtures it, she creates something new out of it, and that's how life is created. On another level, in nature, a seed that's being planted would represent the masculine principle. The ground that it's being planted in represents the feminine principle. A seed by itself, if you just threw it on a sidewalk, nothing would grow, right? The ground by itself, nothing would happen if it was just laying there without something being in it. So in order for a tree or a plant to be created, it requires the seed doing what the seed does and the earth doing what the earth does, and them working together in order to create some new life. In each person, there's the feminine element in terms of their nurturing quality, which men and women do have, their creative quality, and their ability to both give and accept. In a conversation, for example, it requires whoever it is, it could be two men or it could be two women, representing alternately, ideally, the masculine and the feminine principle. Let's say person A is talking. As they're talking, they're projecting outward, and so they're representing the masculine principle. Person B, as they're listening and receiving, is representing the feminine principle. Then they take in what they heard, they create a new thought with it, which is the creative element of the feminine, and then they give back a new thought. Now they have become the masculine because they're giving a new thought to the other person, and hopefully if that person listens, then they're receiving and they're representing the feminine principle. As you can see, if everybody's busy talking at each other, nothing can happen. If everybody's listening, nothing can happen. And so it alternates back and forth, and that's what the ideal conversation would be. And then in the family and society, that feminine element represents the compassionate, nurturing role that perhaps wouldn't have gotten us into Iraq. If somebody had really been thinking a little bit more about the situation with the young men that were going over there and the mothers that were leaving children to be put in foster care. That was one of the things that I saw with that situation, is there was an overloading of the masculine way of looking at things and not enough of the feminine aspect. So one of the things that we're seeing happening in the society, I think, has to do with the fact that the feminine has been devalued. In psychopathology, there are two syndromes in particular that I see as representing the feminine quality. The first one is depression, because depression is, as my understanding of it, is anger that's turned inward. It doesn't have an outlet, so the person turns it back on themselves, and anybody who's experienced depression knows that you feel kind of locked up within yourself. So that natural balance of the masculine, which would be able to discharge some energy or to be able to say to somebody, I'm angry at you, is being blocked off, and everything is going inward and kind of circulating inside. And the second one is schizophrenia, because the whole way that a schizophrenic thinks is in an intuitive, circular kind of fashion that is not really in contact with the outside variables. People people have talked about the unconscious, which is what the schizophrenic is living in a lot, which the Freudians call primary process, that kind of thinking that really hasn't been affected by socialization. It's not correct thinking, it's just it's thought that hasn't been disciplined to fit into social standards. Characterizes the thinking of a schizophrenic. And as they become more and more sick, they draw more and more within themselves. So they're representing, again, that inward nature of the feminine principle. In treatment, it's important for those of you that are looking to do any kind of therapy or counseling or whatever to be aware that as a therapist or as a counselor, you will be expressing some of the feminine. Oh, if you're not going to be a very good person for somebody to be working with. One of the main qualities that a therapist has, if they're good, is their ability to listen. And again, that's to be able to receive so the person can express themselves and feel comfortable about letting out whatever is inside of them and knowing that that other person is going to receive it and be accepting of it. When a therapist is interpreting something after they've listened for a while and then they process what they've heard and then they give back a new thought to the client as a way of them conceptualizing what they've been talking about in different ways. That's the creative element of the feminine. Again, that's like the creation of a new life after something has been taken in and nurtured and given back out. In family therapy, a lot of what we have to work with when we're working with couples and families is the fact that people aren't listening to each other. So a lot of the work that we do with families and couples is to help them to hear one another. So frequently, the therapist will have the person that just finished talking, the person who was not talking, to repeat what the person who was talking said. And what people find a lot of times is that you don't really know what the other person said because while they're talking, you were busy thinking about what your response was going to be, and you didn't even hear what they were saying. So a large part of improving communication is to enhance that very feminine quality of listening and being able to receive. The focus that we have in helping people to get healthier emotionally is, and what hopefully the therapist is modeling, is a sense of genuineness, of openness, of being receptive so that the person learns that these are some qualities that are important, because if you keep this wall around yourself, you can never really interact in a healthy way with other people. I think that we need to be redefining what femininity is, who women are, and especially for African American women. There's an image that's very strong in my mind. I don't know how many people, if you saw the TV movie A Woman Called Moses, but there was a point, it was about Harriet Tubman. There was a point at which, while she was still in slavery, the mule or the horse that her master had to plow the field with, something happened to it, so he strapped her onto the plow, and she served the role of the horse. And that, to me, was my image of how degraded black women became during slavery and how far away from our natural selves we became. So it seems to me it's very important for us to redefine ourselves. Wade Noble defined power as the ability to define reality and to have other people accept that definition as if it were their own. And as we move forward to empower ourselves, I think it's very important that we not accept definitions that were given of us. Yes, black women are strong, but that doesn't mean that we have to be given the entire load because people say, well, she can handle it. Okay? We also need to be treated gently. We need to be pampered. We need to be allowed to be gentle so that we can give our nurturing function, because when a woman has 3.5 jobs and she's got to handle all the children and men are talking to her bad when she's on the street, it's very difficult for her to go within herself to bring out the tenderness that the family and the society needs. So this is not something just for the women to be working on redefining ourselves. It's something in terms of the brothers who can be opening doors for women and helping women with packages okay? And enabling women to get back to being women and getting back to being that feminine perspective. So I just want to say again, to remind you about Sankofa, and to tell you again that there's no harm in going back to the old when it's not working properly.
Okay, we have 5 minutes for questions. Any questions?
I have a statement. Oh, by the way, my name is Derek Jones. You said brothers should open doors and so forth. I agree with that. But society is structured in a way where there is no brothers around. All right? When you look for brothers, you look around Kazali. When you look for brothers,
But
you
you're
look
a brother.
I'm a brother, but
all you have to do-
I'm one of many. But others, like my brother, for instance, others are incarcerated because of the white man. Now, if you don't have a brother there, or because of their mentality, not just because of the white man, because you can't blame everything on white man. Now, if you don't have no brother there to help open that door for you, you have to open that door for yourself.
Right.
See, I'm one of many children. My mother was a single parent since I'd never seen my father. So when the black woman have children and there's no man there for her, she has to be strong enough to open that door for herself. Because a lot of these brothers out here will put that seed inside you and break north. And some of you sisters know what I'm talking about.
That means leave.
So that's why I say women
Well, you have to
should
explain.
be strong for themselves and then be strong together as a family structure.
They can say for the
No, I just made a statement. I'm not asking no questions. Everything that you said was well taken. I have no questions, but I just wanted to add on to what you said.
All right, brother.
I think I could mention something about thinking of the past or going back to the past. How do you see the feminine movement? How do you think that reflects on the life of a black woman? Did it add anything to a black woman, or do you subscribe to the feminist movement that we have now? If there is one.
I don't consider myself a feminist. Obviously, I have a PhD in clinical psychology, so I also don't believe in being barefoot and pregnant. I think that there needs to be a balance, and like I said, there were some important things that were done as a result of the feminist movement, but I think that one of the negative aspects of it was that it really devalued everything that was, most things that were related to traditional womanhood. I think that many of the issues of the feminist movement did not relate to us. We weren't locked in anybody's kitchen, except possibly somebody's that we worked in. So the idea of getting out of the house and into the workforce wasn't as critical an issue for us. To some extent, we may want to be trying to sit down a little bit more. Yes. I'm sorry, but she had something that she wanted to say. Maybe we could continue this afterwards.
I would like to know if it's your perspective that women are born with a natural capability of nurturing, or is it something that is external, that is imprinted, which we all know will be conditioned or something?
The current psychological literature seems to say that it's socialization. There are some things like the different structure of the brain that would indicate that there are some innate predispositions. So I think that women are more naturally suited, although anybody given a particular situation can adapt themselves to it, but it may or may not be the thing that they're most comfortable with. I think house husbands are something that men can do, but it's not their natural predisposition.
I think another way of looking at that also is that it's among any species that it's natural to care for the next generation. I mean, just for the survival of the species in and of itself. I think among any level of the evolutionary process, you'll see that. So that, I mean, whether it's, it could be male or female, but caring for, and it's more likely to be the female, just in terms of anatomy. I think that we suggest that too. I'm sure that's all, yeah.
That's it for questions. Any other questions we'll have to wait until after. Our next speaker is Beverly Green. Dr. Green is a clinical psychologist. She is currently supervising psychologist and clinical assistant professor at the State University of New York. She has a private clinical and counseling practice in Brooklyn and is senior psychologist and director of inpatient child and adolescent psychology services at Kings County Hospital. Dr. Green obtained her bachelor's in psychology at New York University and her master's and doctor of philosophy in clinical psychology at Adelphi University. She also studied at the Margaret University Graduate School of Education and Columbia University Teachers College Workshop Series. Our presentation today is on treatment of minority women.
My current incarnation of employment is at the University of Medicine and Dentistry in New Jersey, where I supervise and train budding clinical psychologists. My primary interests and activities in clinical psychology have their origins in a commitment to increasing the level of cultural diversity and cultural fluency among clinical practitioners. During my studies in graduate school, something that became obvious but was of no surprise was that somehow people of color were conspicuously omitted, not simply as faculty members and students by and large, but also in the reflection of the literature and the concepts about who people were. Somehow there were these notions about who we were that weren't like people that I knew. That fostered a commitment and sort of encouraged me to think about those things and to write about those things that are not written about us or are not written from affirmative perspectives. Many of my current activities revolve around using some of the principles of feminist psychology and feminist psychotherapy in psychological theory and practice and training, and specifically incorporating cultural perspectives into the factors that one should consider in the treatment of African American patients, as well as other persons of color. One of the ways I've attempted to do this has been by contributing book chapters and articles in various publications, as well as organizing and presenting such material at conferences and forums like this. Also, I've attempted to do that by way of developing and teaching courses in racial and cultural perspectives in psychotherapy in psychology postgraduate training programs. It's been nearly 10 years since I left graduate school, and most of the people that I train are as ill-prepared to treat people of color as they were then. More work in this area is essential to establishing some kind of a foundation in this field for making established clinical as well as research methods and practices more culturally sensitive and therefore more accurate, specifically to the treatment of African Americans, but certainly not exclusive to them, as our culture becomes more inclusive of other persons of color. It's also important to raise the level of consciousness of practitioners, the importance of being aware of such matters in the context of clinical practice and being conversant in the ability to raise them. It should be clear, however, for those of you who plan careers in psychology, that while there is an overt call for diversity in these matters, as there was, as I recall, when I was in graduate school, that occurs primarily in superficial kinds of ways, and that resistance to incorporating this material and, in fact, incorporating persons of color and those perspectives in the field of psychology is still pervasive. That is still reflected in graduate programs where persons of color among faculty and students continue to be grossly underrepresented. And something that I'm frequently asked by students who are both African American and of other, what one would consider numerical minority cultural groups in this country, is that somehow, when you get your PhD, don't people listen? They don't. It would be naive for anyone to assume that education or credentials will preclude your need to actively negotiate racist and sexist barriers in institutions. And in psychology as a discipline, whether it is in the field of in clinical practice kinds of programs or in academia. Some would argue that academia is more resistant. I think they're more or less the same. It's important to remember that psychology as a discipline did not develop and does not exist outside of a framework of academic traditions that exist as a part of American institutions. And they reflect the values and assumptions and often the biases and the problems that are inherent in those traditions. It is important to me when treating and training people in the treatment of persons of color, and I will talk specifically about African American clients, but obviously some of these ideas apply to other persons of color, that in the treatment of African Americans, something that is often omitted from the literature and omitted from training is the notion that African Americans have more to do in some ways in respect to the psychological realities that they face than their white counterparts. African Americans have to constantly negotiate barriers of racism, whether they are what Maya Angelou poetically refers to as the little murders or insults or the grand executions. They are always there, and they are a piece of psychological business that most black people have to find ways of negotiating some way or other, in addition to everything else that people have to negotiate to live. Those who have children have to teach their children how to do that. The question then is how to do this, without going mad, without assuming a stance in the world that precludes letting in those things that might be nurturing and giving, while trying to keep out those things that are toxic. What is apparent to me as a result of my years of practice is that there are a range of skills and resources that African Americans have for dealing with this kind of pervasive reality of their lives, that is adaptive, that displays resilience and psychological resource that is never written and is never talked about, and that most black people don't even know they have, don't even know that they do most of the time. And in my work with clients, part of what I attempt to put them in touch with is the way that they do this. Now, in doing so, I don't want to give the impression that somehow one can romanticize oppression and assume that, isn't that nice? You can be oppressed and all these wonderful skills can emerge as a result. While that is true, a lot of energy gets siphoned off in addressing all of the things that have to be addressed that warrant the development of those skills. So it's important to keep some sort of a balance in mind with respect to that. However, what has been most frequently omitted, in my experience, is the sense that as a people, we are not all in this sort of abysmal, victimless stance. That black people as a group have triumphed over inhumane atrocities, and that somehow one must ask the question that goes beyond what the traditional literature has addressed, which is, well, you can imagine how oppressed these people would be. Rather, what is it that is inherent in our culture and our values that allows us to do that and not be annihilated in the process? That the majority of us are perhaps not in therapy, not doing poorly, although not thrilled about life all the time, nobody is, find ways of negotiating their lives and doing things that are fruitful and productive. As we understand that better as clinicians, we can use that knowledge to help and assist those who have not. The essence of that is an attempt to look at who we are from an affirmative rather than a deficit perspective, and to use what one may see as a living history or repertoire of resources and skills to help those of us who are in trouble. And I guess the focus of treatment is often around helping those of us who are in trouble so that they can live better, be more productive, and generally feel good about themselves, doing whatever they are.
Any questions?
I might be asking an open-loaded question, but how did African Americans get to be such like victims in all this, through slavery and all this? I mean, where does it go back to? I mean, is it melanin? Is the fact that your skin color is different? People treat you differently, or where's the bias from? Now society is more open. There's no slavery. So,
The issue of where did this all come from, I don't know if I can do this in 5 minutes, but, you know, there is a history of slavery in the United States, which, you know, we have to remember, African Americans are the only ethnic group in America that didn't come to America to better their condition and were not willing participants in their immigration. They were brought here by force and were legally defined over a long period of time as less than human beings. So that the kind of assimilation into the mainstream of many American institutions that other ethnic groups have been able to achieve was not available to African Americans because up until 1965, it was legally permissible for states to preclude your right to vote because you were black. That is not so long ago. While the literal chains of slavery were removed, the legal institutions and other institutions of this country carried that practice forth and still does in many forms. The use simply of psychological assessment instruments that are biased against black children, or in which black children aren't adequately represented in the normative samples, that are used in spite of that to make decisions about their lives, is a form of slavery. That is, slavery is when you institutionalize the status as someone and you say, you know, you are going to be restricted in your movements to this particular circle. And the way that's explained in a free society where otherwise people would say, this is America. You say, you know, everybody has the right to do whatever here. How can you justify that you do this and you say something else? Well, then you have to go underground and develop other means of perpetuating it that aren't as obvious as putting people in chains and locking them up in places. You arrange to place limitations on what kinds of occupations they can enter, how much money they can make, therefore where they will live, where they will get health care, where they will be educated, and what they can do. And what is more insidious in that process is a kind of slavery of the mind. Internalized racism is the most insidious form of racism, and that is the means by which many black people have been convinced that they are all of those things that people had to make up to say about us to justify what they were doing to us. And once people believe that about themselves, they act that out in such a way that the dominant culture then doesn't have to really do very much because you will do it to yourself. I'm not sure if that is.
I understand the trick knowledge that our African Americans are confronted with that entrap our minds. But I'm just curious, how are white people going to free their minds from that same trick knowledge that caused them to accept untrue beliefs about African Americans? I mean, we're not the only sick people. You know,
I'm not defining us as sick.
No, I know. I'm not saying that you are, but when people just believe untrue things about other people based on stereotypical, whatever you want to call it, it makes you sick. It makes you sick. And when I said that we are not the only sick people, I mean, we are not the only foolish people. You know, white people are just as foolish to accept those stereotype images themselves and think that they are much better than we are. And my question is to you is, what's their remedy? Because they need a remedy also.
Well, I think the remedy is truth, and that sounds very simple. It's not as simple as it seems, because when people have images of themselves that they have held on to for a long time, whether those images are negative or positive, whether or not they're true, they don't just give them up because you come in and say, well, but that's not true, and now this is what you should believe. That's often why psychotherapy takes more than just a day to convince somebody that something that they're doing is not necessarily in their interest. I think partly what you're addressing is a need for a different kind of incorporation of material in our educational systems. That if you teach me a lie about myself, and that lie has something to do with what you think about you, then you also believe a lie about you. Only if the lie you believe about you gets you more material goods, then you're not going to be so invested in giving up that lie. You know, I mean, you may not believe it, but it's sort of like if you play a card game and the game is rigged. The person who wins all the time never gets a clear win because the game was rigged anyway. The person who loses never gets to demonstrate their skill, but the person who wins, even though they know they cheated, doesn't really want to give that up. Convincing them that they cheated is going to be even more difficult.
So you say racism, in other words, racism now, is so far as it's not like it was 500 years ago or 200 years ago, where it was physical bondage. Now it's more of a mental bondage.
I wanted to add something to the question, to the answer to the question about what we have to do to change white folks' minds. I wanted to refer to some of the psychological research about how to change attitudes, prejudicial attitudes. And one of the major findings has been that, again, like Dr. Green said, it's not enough to tell people, well, but look at this African culture, look how great it was, look at all the things we've accomplished. Often that creates even more animosity in people. On some campuses, after you do racial awareness workshops, you have more ethno-violence, okay? What researchers like Alport have found is that people need equal status contact. And that's where some of you will play an important role, because you will go out there with your degrees, with your training, with your knowledge, and interact on an equal level with white people. And it's been found that over time, that's what can change attitudes. Just briefly, in the classroom, people are trying to work on changing racism in the classroom, in interracial classes, because we have learned that desegregation hasn't been enough to change those attitudes. A researcher named Aronson, I think that's his name, has designed what he calls a jigsaw classroom, so that when you have black and white students in a class, you can't just have the white students always being the ones to answer questions and our learning styles are often different. We often behave differently in the classroom. With the jigsaw classroom, students have to work together and everyone participates. And he has found that through that kind of experience, young children begin to get over their prejudicial beliefs.
And to add to that, if you want to change the mind of a white person about African Americans, you'll be waiting a long time, because there are a lot of black leaders which have been assassinated for trying to change the mind of Europeans. So when Malcolm X came out and said, we as African people, we are superior and so forth, and a white man came up with the United States flag and told him, you ain't saying nothing, and shot him, don't think that the black shot Malcolm X. The European man did that. So you don't blame it on the black man, you blame it on society and what goes on. And one brother said we are foolish. Nobody in this classroom at the moment, right now, is foolish. If you was foolish, you wouldn't be out. You wouldn't be right here. You would be outside smoking crack. You'd be in jail talking to yourself. It's a long thing. It's a process. If you want to change the mind of white people, you first have to change the mind of yourself. When we grew up, don't be disrespectful. When we grew up,
That's right.
we grew up, we was taught about George Washington instead of George Washington Carver. We was taught about Malcolm Forbes instead of Malcolm X. When we change our minds, then we can try to change their mind.
Thank you.
That's right.
Our next speaker is Lisa Whitney. Lisa Whitney. She is currently assistant professor in the psychology program at State University of New York, College at Old Westbury. She obtained her bachelor's from the University of Michigan and her doctorate of philosophy from Gordon Derner Institute of Advanced Psychological Studies at Adelphi University. She is active in the Association of Black Psychologists, serving as Eastern Regional Representative and as President of the New York chapter. Her research interests include the therapeutic experience of African American therapists, curriculum development in Afrocentric philosophy, multicultural education, parent training, and survival conflict and survival guilt in African American college settings. She has conducted training sessions on mentoring and teaching in multicultural settings, adolescent development, and telephone hotline counseling. She is a practicing clinician. She speaks on career options for women in psychology.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be in a room of so many people of color. It's always exciting to do that. At my school, we have about 26% African American students, so I see quite a few African Americans, but it's never a whole packed room like this. So I'm really enjoying just being here for that reason. How many of you are psychology majors? Okay, that's the other thing I don't get to have at my school. There are very few African American psych majors. Most of them tend to go into business and those kinds of fields, so I'm glad to have a chance to talk to some black psych majors too. Did anyone notice anything in common about several of the panelists? Yes. 3 of the 6 panelists got our degrees at the Gordon Derner Institute at Adelphi. And I just wanted to emphasize that because I wanted you to know that I think that part of why you have such a high representation from that program is because the Black Student Organization was so strong there. And we really were very much nurtured. That's part of why I went there. I was accepted at a couple other places. But I chose it because of the group feeling, okay? And we sort of got trained that we should be out here giving back to our communities, and that came from the other black students. It's a program that I hope you'll consider. How many of you are going to graduate school? Good, good. How many of you are thinking about going to graduate school? Okay, I hope I will say a few things that will convince more of you that that's something that you probably need to do, particularly in psychology. I have learned over the years that my strength is in practical applications of knowledge. So I'm going to talk to you about some very practical things you need to know about in terms of becoming a psychologist. What I'm going to talk about, some of you already know. I'll just be highlighting things that you already know, so don't feel insulted. But some of you might not know, and I want to just reinforce some of these points, okay? The first thing I want to say is that based on what you've heard, based on the lives that we all lead, the things we see on television, I hope it's clear that we need you in the field of psychology. Okay, we especially need, even though this is a forum on women in psychology, I have to say we especially need black men in psychology, okay? My private practice is in the borough of Queens. I'm constantly getting phone calls of people, don't you think you can squeeze in one more hour because I'm really trying to find someone African American. I know of 2 African American psychologists practicing in the borough of Queens. 2, and we're both doing it part-time, okay? There are lots of opportunities in the field for African American men and women and other people of color as well, because we are so very underrepresented. I was at Adelphi just, I guess it was Wednesday, and we only got 6 African American applicants to the program this year. 6 out of a couple hundred. Now, mind you, the applicants have dropped for white and black, but when we were in the program, didn't quite overlap. The 2 of us did, but we got more like 30 or 40 African American applicants. So that shows you, I don't know exactly what the reasons are, but I hope more of you will stay in the field of psychology. It's a great field. It provides you with the ability to give back to your community, to help develop your community and the people in it and earn your living at the same time, okay, which is a nice combination. I think it's something that we are all trained to do, is to find a way to give back to our community, to contribute to our community. It's part of the Afrocentric worldview that we heard about earlier, that we belong to a community, that the survival of our whole community is what's more important, okay, than just our own individual survival. Now, some of us have certainly strayed away from that. We need to move back to it. But that's part of what I like about the field, is that in my everyday work, I'm giving back to my community. I think it's an excellent field also because it's very, very flexible. Already in the panel presentations you've heard about a number of different kinds of professional activities you can be involved in. We heard several presentations that were very, very theoretical. Okay, people really trying to stretch the boundaries of how we think about women, how we think about people of African descent. And that's one of the other things that we as African American women in the field of psychology do. We're always trying to say, well, but psychology should really take a look at some of these other issues that aren't being addressed. I'm concerned about the textbooks that you all are probably using. The Intro to Psych textbooks with 700 pages, and if you look in the index under race, culture, I did research on this, I looked at about 25 textbooks. Race, culture, racism, black, and I'm forgetting I think prejudice was the other word. You find maybe 5 or 6 pages out of 700. The field of psychology over time has not really seen race, culture, ethnicity, and even gender to a large degree as important variables, okay? I'm sure you're all learning that the white man has been the standard by which we've been measured. So again, if you come into this field, you have lots of opportunities to try to work on changing some of that, because there's a lot of change needed. I want to say just a couple basic things about the kind of training that you need. You asked a question earlier about it, and I'm not sure, again, when I came through the University of Michigan in the 70s, there was very, very little discussion on careers or the kind of preparation you needed. It just so happened that I took one course that told me about the field of clinical psychology. Otherwise, I might not have even known about it. I was always going to be a developmental psychologist. And so I want you to be aware early in your training, and I'm not saying this to discourage you by any means, but that in psychology, ideally, you need a PhD or some form of doctorate. You know, there's a PsyD, Doctor of Psychology, there's an EDD, Doctor of Education, but so much of the policy with regard to who can work as a psychologist is now saying that you have to have a PhD, and in many cases also a license. I never heard about a license all the way through my undergraduate career. I didn't even hear about it until graduate school. I was like, license? What's that? So I want you to know that to legally call yourself a psychologist and put up your little shingle or your little thing on your house that says, I'm a psychologist, you legally are supposed to have a doctoral degree and a license from the state that you're living in, okay? Now, there are some exceptions if you're thinking about moving to other states. California, for example, has a license that you can get with a master's degree in psychology. It's marriage and family therapist or something like that. And of course, with an MSW, a master's in social work, you can call yourself a social worker, get a license, and have your own independent practice. Now, with a master's degree, you can do a lot of things. You cannot legally call yourself a psychologist, but you can, again, contribute to the community. You can develop new theories about the functioning of people of African descent. But you are more limited and you earn less money, okay? With a bachelor's degree, you're a little more limited and you earn even less money than that. There are still very creative and important things that you can do. Alcoholism counseling, working with the mentally retarded, but you're not calling yourself a psychologist, and you can't set up legally an independent practice and say, you know, I'm doing this work because I have a license to do it, okay? So that's just basically, I want you to think about some of those issues, and some more of that kind of thing you can really read about. I'm going to try to talk about things that you might not read about, okay? But I always want to lay that out a little bit and get you thinking about it, okay? I want to talk about a few things that I think are especially important for people of color. Our panelists have talked about some of the extra baggage that we sort of carry, especially Dr. Green, about the extra work that we have to do and the energy that gets siphoned off because we're struggling with various kinds of barriers and various kinds of ideas that people have that are erroneous about us. So I want us to think about, again, some practical things that we need to keep in mind, because again, we are under a different kind of scrutiny as African Americans. And we could get into a big debate over whether men or women have it more difficult in this country. We had a debate about that in my black family class just last week. But the point is, we all have a hard time. And therefore, we all have to, I think, be even more trained and even more careful about what we do, okay? One of the points I wanted to make, and that I think, again, is even more important for people of color, is to keep your options open. Keep your options open, and the word options is here above my name. The word options was one that I got tired of hearing about when I was growing up. My mother was always saying, well, what are your alternatives? What are your choices? Don't get depressed because you always have choices, okay? I was always hearing that. And it's one of the sort of rules that I live by, that I always have another route that I can take. And that's one of the things that I think you need to really keep in mind as you're developing your careers, is to have a couple routes you can take. Don't lock yourself into one thing, okay? Taking civil service exams as they come up, so your name's always on there. When you're applying to different graduate schools, apply to a few types of graduate schools, so that if you don't get into the one you want that first year, you can go to the other one. Then when you reapply to the first one, you have, okay, you've enhanced your application. Keep learning new skills and keep sharpening the skills that you have. And when I talk about skills, I want you to know that the writing skill is extraordinarily important. I'm sure you've heard that. I just want to re-emphasize it. Be sure that you know how to write. And in my opinion, it's important to know how to write standard English, okay? Now, I'm not saying you should throw your black English out the window. No. I think African American people need to be bilingual. The same way that people who come from Haiti have to learn English because they speak French, okay? If they want to be in a professional setting, they don't have to learn English. But I think if you want to be a professional, it's good to be bilingual in that way. It's one of the skills that we have really developed over the years, is really being able to move from one culture to another and maintain our identity. Some of us don't do it as well as others, but many of us are very skilled at dealing in the white world and dealing in the black world, okay? And I think that in writing, you need to be able to do that as well. You need to hold on to the way you learned to speak growing up. Not all of us learned black English, many of us did. And you need to learn standard English as well, because I'm convinced, I don't have any data to back it up, but when it comes to things like licensing exams, there's an essay exam. You might have heard about an essay exam. It's a grueling 3-hour thing. And I believe that when they see black English on some of those exams, they say, oh, this is a black person, and guess what I'm going to do with this one? And they mark it down, okay? Because there are some just patently racist people in this country who don't care how good you are. If you are black, we don't want you. Okay, and I think we have to keep that in mind. And we have to be careful about how we proceed because of that. Another point I wanted to make is that we need to continually find ways of affirming ourselves. Okay, and I think in some ways that's even more important for women, because as we heard earlier, women are devalued in this country to a large extent, in the world to a large extent. We need to belong to organizations, we need to go to conferences, we need to affirm ourselves personally. We need to use self-affirmation by having pride in what we do, by nurturing our strengths and having an awareness of our strengths. Basically what I'm saying is we need to know ourselves very well. That's extremely important if you want to be a psychologist, is self-knowledge. Also, we need to affirm ourselves through the things that we keep in our homes, the books and posters and so on. This is I Dream a World. Black women who changed America. You can come up and look at it later. This is Black and Beautiful, about black hair care and personal care and self-development. And whenever I get sort of depressed and feel beaten down, I go and take this stuff out and I get recharged, you know. I also get refueled every year at the convention of the Association of Black Psychologists, because you go into a convention and there are 400 African American psychologists. It's so exciting, and you really get the energy you need to go back out here and do battle. So affirming ourselves is very important. The last thing, and I'll finish very quickly, is networking and the use of resources. extraordinarily important because of the barriers that people have been talking about. We have to form our own networks often because we're not allowed to break into those other ones. They have various ways of finding out who we are. Often because we do affirm ourselves and we are proud of our heritage, we have on our resume something that points out that we're black or Hispanic or whatever we are. So then again, whoops, this one goes in the trash. We don't want them here, okay? And it's a real challenge that we face. So I think we need to find ways of breaking into those networks, and we also need to form our own networks of resources and contacts and influential people that can assist us along the way. I have an article here on networking for you that was in Essence magazine, and I got that opportunity to do that article through networking. Susan Taylor was at one of the events of the Association of Black Psychologists, and I walked up to her and started talking to her. We have to be very adept and very comfortable with going up to people and talking to them, and networking is a mutual process. It's not just what can you give me and what jobs do you know about, but here's what I know about. And especially on a campus like this, you have so many opportunities for that. And you need to take advantage of some of the internships, some of the summer research programs, some of the conferences, presenting your work at conferences. I was glad to hear that you had done that. No one ever said to me at the University of Michigan, Lisa, why don't you present this research? Why don't you publish this research? Okay, and I don't know if that was because I was at a white college. It could have been. I did have black faculty members, and they didn't say it either. So you try to be aware of those kinds of opportunities too. Keep in mind politics. I've been talking about that in terms of racism and sexism. And we have to be very meticulous. When we're sending out our applications, when we're doing our graduate school applications, have someone that you trust who has been through the process look over that for you. I have heard about people being denied tenure on the basis of one typographical error. Okay, they focus in on that for the whole meeting, and I've seen it happen in my school. They're trying to deny tenure, and they try to spend a lot of time on how this man has an accent. He was from Kenya. He didn't have an accent, number one. And number two, 7 people out of 7 years had said that. And if I hadn't been there to make the point that, wait a minute, this is not statistically sound because so few people said it, but I'm just saying that they find, as you know, little ways of, well, yeah, he has a PhD, but he's still not quite good enough. So I think we have to always be as good as we can. We have to be meticulous about our writing, our typing, the kinds of things that we send, keeping our appointments, being on time for appointments so that they don't have those kinds of excuses to use, okay? The last thing I want to say is that building a career doesn't happen overnight, okay? Many of you are not, I have been out there working, and you know that to some extent, but it's still true even after you get a PhD. It takes time to get to the point that you want to be at, but it's very exciting getting there. We can make an important contribution, and we can learn a lot of important lessons along the way, which hopefully we share with other folks. I have a resource manual for African American psychology students, one of our few fundraisers for the Association of Black Psychologists, so we charge $350. But if you'd like one of these, I have it for you. And I also have a reading list. Thanks.
I have a question before we move on. I would like to, this is more internal and external racism, okay, within our own group. Okay, now I want to ask something about African Americans giving back to their community.
Yes.
I want to ask you, why don't African Americans who make it and who have more to give, or who are more well off, don't give to the African communities?
Well, I'm going to challenge you there. I don't know if I agree with that. You know? Go ahead.
Let me give you an example.
Okay.
Let me give you an example. Have you ever watched these videos on TV? You notice how African American rap artists or singers, they will get light-skinned blacks rather than dark-skinned blacks?
I've noticed.
Okay. Also, Arsenio Hall, you know how he he shy away from blacks as far as really having them being represented and the culture represented instead of trying to make money off of it. Okay, another thing, Oprah Winfrey. I notice Oprah Winfrey more will cry for a white person than she would for a black. And she would. And she would. And this thing about this program they had on TV, this little mindset, subliminal things. That she had 3 white kids 2 blacks and 1 Hispanic? Why couldn't it be 2 blacks, 2 Hispanics, and 2 whites?
I understand what you're saying, and I'm sensitive to those kinds of things too. I think there are a couple things I want to point out. First of all, that the television projects certain images of African Americans, right? And we get to see those people, but Oprah and Arsenio and those music videos, that's a small segment of the black community. We have a lot of black professionals out here doing various kinds of work through their churches, through their community centers, through their schools, through all kinds of things. And, you know, we have to keep those people in mind too. And those people on television are very visible. And then the other point I wanted to make is that you have to, again, recognize this challenge of dealing in a white power structure. So that Oprah and Arsenio and those music video folks have to deal with that to some extent if they're going to get anything out. And we have to sort of be sensitive to that, how they have some limitations and they're working within those limitations. And I think often they do a very good job and sometimes they don't. But I just want to emphasize that there are a lot of us out here trying to do things, and we have to be aware of that too.
But also,
there are a couple other folks. We can talk afterwards, okay? I want to hear from as many people as possible. Yes?
What can happen to a psychologist who has a practice without a license?
If you have a practice without a license and you're calling yourself a psychologist, okay, it's real tricky and it's hard to say it all in just one evening. Some people have a practice and they call themselves a psychotherapist or a counselor, okay, or a therapist, because you can't get a license to be any of those. You get a license to be a social worker or a psychologist. Now, if you call yourself that, that's considered a little bit shady, because really you should just get the degree you're supposed to have, get the license, and that's the end of it. But people do it, and for many people it's not a problem, okay? But according to the white folks in power, it's a big problem, okay? They don't keep in mind that many African Americans can't get those degrees because of money and so on. But I also want you to know there's lots of money out there if you want to get a degree. I have to squeeze that in. If someone finds out that you're calling yourself a psychologist and they report you to the licensing board, you can be prevented from ever taking the licensing exam. They can say, oh, well, this person was lying and misrepresenting him or herself, so we're going to keep him or her from ever taking the exam. That's the worst case scenario.
Also, a more practical consideration is that if you're in practice and you do that, you can be sued.
Yes.
If somebody decides to sue you and you're doing what you're doing without a license, you can not only kiss away the lawsuit, but if you have managed to get insurance, your insurance is not obligated to cover you.
Yes, because to get we have malpractice insurance as practitioners with a private practice. In order to get that, you have to prove that you're licensed. Okay, so it's very, very complicated. Yes.
I have a question. I'm a psychology major right now, and outside of what I've read from Dr. Santiwa's literature, Naeem Akbar's literature, it's like, you know, it doesn't seem like a lot of the theories and concepts that are applicable necessarily to black people, right? So, like, I want to go into substance abuse, right? And I wanted to know, what is your association that you said about the Foreign Psychologists doing to, like, expand on like African psychology?
Yes.
And another question was,
I think we only have time for one.
yeah, and
That's a
is
good
there a
one.
particular school that has a program that caters more so to, like,
Yes. FAMU, Florida A&M University,
That's what Naeem
has,
Akbar.
no, he's not there, he's
No?
at the University of Florida, but
Yeah,
Joe Baldwin is at FAMU and other folks who are developing scales to measure Afrocentricity and so on. So that's one program, I think it's the only one. And your first question, remind me, the Association of Black Psychologists has a federal grant to do AIDS education and training. And within that, some folks at a clinic in Washington, D.C., called the Progressive Life Center, are developing what's called N2 therapy. And there are publications on that in the Journal of Black Psychology, published by our group. And there are lots of people around the country developing theories. And again, you might be getting the impression that there's not a lot available because of these textbooks and so on, but there's a huge amount available, and I can share some other names with you so you can find some of it. Okay?
Our next speaker is Marceline Watler. Marceline Watler is the Director of Community Education for New York City's Child Welfare Administration. She received her bachelor's degree in psychology, business administration at Medgar Evers College, a master's in family counseling and therapy, Long Island University, master's in education, Long Island University, master's in public administration, Long Island University. She's currently a doctoral candidate. She lectures extensively. She is an advocate for children and families, a professor in business and student service division at Medgar Evers College. She's also the president of the Alumni Association at Medgar Evers College. She will speak on child abuse and neglect.
Hi, fellow students. It is just befitting that we are talking about celebrating women's history. And tonight I want to take this opportunity to celebrate you, because you are the agents of change. You're the ones that's going to use your experiences here and your life experiences, your degree, to make changes, I hope, in the community. So we have talked about lots of problems here that women are faced with, and men too. And what I'd like to ask you is, what are you going to do about changing some of these problems? And one very serious problem that we have in our community, especially in community where people are poor and are stressed out, people that are underemployed, people who have AIDS, people who have unwanted pregnancies, economic problems, maleducation. All these things breed a certain type of stress. And so we find that abuse and neglect, while it occurs on every level in society, we see it more prevalently among people that are poor. And of course, people that are poor and denied in America are minorities. For example, between July and November of 1990, we had in the Child Welfare Administration 20,849 reports of child abuse and neglect. And of those, 34,291 were children. I want to tell you also that most of these children are minorities. So we're in trouble. We're faced with a great social dilemma, and it's going to take people like us here in this room to make some kind of change. Child abuse and neglect doesn't occur out on the road. No one grabs the child as the child is going down the street. It's not rape. It occurs very frequently in homes by members of the family or people very close to the family. And so this is what we have to talk about as we talk about women and families and the Afro-American woman. What's happening with us? What's changing in our home life? What's going on in our life? Who are we? We have to redefine ourselves, as some speakers said here today. And so you have to help to redefine the role of women. Who is the Afro-American man? Who is the Afro-American woman? And what are we going to do to take control over our own lives and our families? And in terms of nurturing, is the problem that we're no longer nurturing our children? I don't know. This is a question I would raise with you and ask you to think about it. However, as I said before, child abuse and neglect occurs very frequently, very close to home. And it takes many forms. We have physical abuse, which is very obvious. The child has a broken limb or an eye swollen, or it's very obvious. But then there are the other kinds of neglect, and that's the emotional, the psychological neglect. That is very subtle, that we're not able to determine sometimes when it's happening. And so it has long-term effects, negative effects on the child's life as the child goes through life. Also, the abuser. Let's look at the abuser. What's happening with this person that's abusing this child or children? Sometimes they themselves were abused. And so we have to stop this cycle from regenerating in our communities, because it's very, very serious when a father is going to sexually abuse his child, or a mother is going to sexually or physically abuse her child. It's happening. It's very prevalent. Sexual abuse is on the rise. And I would urge you to try and do something about it. And what we have found is that a lot of people who are abusers, for example, they're not able to handle stress in their lives. And one of the speakers here talks about networking. We have to network. We have to sort of create support groups for ourselves. Many of us in this room came from someplace else, and our families are not here in the community in which we live. So we are raising the children on our own. There is no grandmother and grandaunt and friendly neighbor surrounding you. You don't know who to leave the child with. You have tremendous problems about finding a job and also going to school and raising your child or children. So we have to network. We have to create families among us in order to help alleviate this stress of isolation that many of us suffer from. Child abuse and neglect, as I said, is on the rise. Sexual abuse. Somebody talked about communicating. We must communicate with our children. We have found another very important reason why abuse and neglect exist is because of poor parenting. And so we need to examine behavior and to decide what kind of parents we're going to be, or should we have children in the first place. A lot of women today, and men too, are having children for the wrong reasons. We have seen the headlines. Mother arrested, child starved to death. Okay? Just a few days ago, some girl killed her cousin in order to get her baby. Mother sold her child, her 5-year-old child was sexually abused in the presence of the mother, so the mother could pay for crack in that way. So what is it that's making us kill our children? What's going on here? We have to take responsibility for our own selves. And when we talk about empowerment, we cannot look to government, and we cannot look to the person down the road. We have to begin to look to ourselves. We have to be able to define ourselves and to begin to assess our strengths and weaknesses. What are the problems we have? And to talk about planning, life planning. A lot of us don't know about planning. You don't have to take a degree in management in order to learn planning. You know, you must plan whatever you do. You plan your career. You plan when you're going to be here this evening, who is taking care of your child. You plan what time you have to get up to go to work, and you have to drop off the child at the babysitter before. Everything we do entails planning and managing and taking control. And if we can do this effectively, we won't be so overwhelmed, because a lot of times people abuse children because they're overwhelmed. They don't know how to handle the stress that they're faced with. But we all face stress in one way or the other. So it's important that we address facing stress, how to manage our lives, networking, as I said before. And network, as this lady said, with people who can do something for you. A lot of us network with negative people. They always call on you for something. But when you want them to even listen to some of your sad stories, they tell you, I'm busy, or you talk too much. Okay? And I tell you, if we would communicate a little bit more with each other and have these positive networking going on, we wouldn't have to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Okay? Because we're able to exchange and to give vent to. So we have to learn to empower ourselves. And when I say empower, empowerment is not just getting that piece of paper. It's what you're going to do with the piece of paper. How you're going to use that degree, not just to get a job, but to change things in your community. And so this issue of child abuse and neglect is very serious. It's on the rise. And I urge you, as psychology majors and whatever your majors are, to begin to look at this problem. Many of us have been abused and didn't realize it. Until now, we are hearing all kinds of educational information about abuse and neglect, and we're saying, someone did that to me. Okay? We need to examine these things. Talk to your children. Listen to your children. Listen to the music they play. Don't say he's making noise. Go listen. What are the words of the music? It tells us about how the children are thinking and exactly where they think they're going. Okay? Another thing is your parenting skills. Praise your children. Hug your children. Nurture your children. Don't demean them. Don't call them names. You're no good son of a whatever. Pick up your things, you slob. You're no good. Why can't you be like your brother? Don't compare your children. So you would be surprised. All these things constitute some form of abuse or the other. Emotional, psychological abuse is devastating. that person, regardless of the therapy they get, and if it's a minority in today's society, you can't afford the therapy. And they go through life never being the kind of person that they could be had they been nurtured and loved and held. So let us begin, as we celebrate Women's Month, to talk about re-nurturing, rekindling, rejuvenating our lives, reaching out to each other, stop criticizing each other. Some gentlemen here made a very good point. We're always talking about what the woman do or so. What is she going to do for the man? We talk about, my man is no good. He has a woman over there. He doesn't want to nurture the children. What are you, the women in this room, doing to teach your sons how to be better men? It's very, very important when we celebrate Women's Month. Women gave birth to men. We have to hold things together. And we have to help the men to get themselves together. Someone also pointed out in Rikers Island, it's filled with our young men, not old men, young men. Go down Bedford and Atlantic, the homeless shelter, young men, teenagers hanging out. What are you going to do in this room to use this education, this experience that we're sharing with you, to be agents of change in your own community? Do you tell your children, don't lie to me, I will punish you? And then the phone rings and you say, go tell her I'm not here? We have to be consistent. Children don't always do what you tell them, but they always do what they see you do. So consistency is one parenting skill that you must apply. Again, thank you very much for having me.
My first question, looking at that, the pictures on Daisy, it's always interesting that, and also you started your speech with the fact of how many child abuse cases are always called in. I am curious as to what happens when there's a call of child abuse. Basically, why I'm interested in that is because if a child is being abused, exactly what is done for that child or that parent?
Okay. The Child Welfare Administration is also known as Special Services for Children and the Bureau of Child Welfare. It's one and the same agency. Every once in a while they change the name. I don't know why. But it's the same agency. And basically its mission is to investigate all reports of abuse and neglect. It's an agency that gets blamed when everything goes wrong with a child. But you have to understand, we are not the judicial system. Decisions made about the children that we take into protective custody are made in the family courts. When we get a call to our central registry number in Albany, it's filtered down to the field offices in our 5 boroughs, depending on where the abuse is alleged to have taken place. Our investigative caseworkers go out and investigate. In other words, is there any evidence or proof that this has occurred? A lot of children that are abused never get into the system because the report comes back unfounded. If everybody says positive things about the family, and when you go everything looks hunky-dory, there is nothing we can do. We do not have the right to walk into a home and take children. Our only input in this is if we get a call. And when we get a call, we take action. Should it be determined that abuse has occurred and the child is removed from the home, within 48 hours, we have to present this to the family court. We do not have the right to take children and hold them indefinitely. It's the court that makes the decision based upon the evidence and the caseworker's report, etc., whether or not we're going to keep the children into protective custody, or in many instances, even if the child has been abused, return the child to the home and provide services such as psychiatric care, counseling, etc., for that family. Protective custody is basically foster care. And we ask you also to open up your hearts and homes to our children. We cannot find homes for little black boys. It's a real crisis. I also want to tell you Placement is not a pretty picture. So even when we take the children into protective custody, they are not getting the best care. And if we take children of different ages and we can't find a home, they sleep in armories. And you break up the children. The teenage brother goes in an armory with teenagers, the 9-year-old goes with 9-year-olds, and the 2-year-old go in a different place. So all that happens when people abuse their children is we further traumatize the children, is basically what's happening. Sometimes the foster parenting mother, who is supposed to nurture and care this child, does not have the special parenting skills to deal with a child that has been abused, and they further abuse them. So it's basically, I'm saying this very quickly, that's what happened. You call the Albany hotline, it's filtered down to the field offices, we go out and investigate, the determination is made, and we decide whether to leave the children, get services for the family, or take the child. You should know, even when we do take children, the ultimate goal is to reunite families. We get services for them, and it's up to the family whether they get back those children. If they don't go for the therapy and the agency reports back to the courts that they're not coming in, they won't get the children. And so sometimes we have to move toward adoption, and many minority children stay in our group homes all their lives. And when they get to age 18, they're dismissed from the system. And that's why the Rikers Island is filled up. Only recently have they instituted a program to prepare them for independent living, and it has much to be desired.
Oh, here. I want to know, as a child welfare administrative psychologist, what do you tell a child that has been taken from their parents, that their parents may be in jail or on crack, and, you know, seeing all the things that their parents went through? What could you tell a child at maybe age 4 or 5 to help them, to reshape them, to become a better person for society?
Sometimes the children are so abused and they see the mother strung out on dope and all the men and dealers in and out of the apartment that they're already aware that something isn't right. And some of them have seen it all their lives and don't think anything is wrong until they're really abused and someone come in to protect them. For a young child, you say, Mommy isn't well or something, and we're going to leave you in this home until they're better. You don't give them all those little details because they wouldn't be able to understand. It's individual. It depends on who is handling the case. You know, we have no real control over that. Okay?
Just open to the panel. I'm not sure how to word this, but how is it, or what kind of key approach would you take to trying to reprogram people? Like a lot of times we look at television, we see negative images of ourselves. We read the media, all kind of media, records, tapes, television, magazines. For young kids who are in the Board of Education, you have a teacher population that in many respects is burnt out, doesn't really care. So how do we approach the deprogramming of this negativity that our kids are constantly seeing all the time? I mean, I'm sure there are many different approaches, but maybe, you know, I don't want to, I mean, we could go to gamut with it, but I mean, what would you say are the key figures?
Are you asking in the context of the family, or in society in general, or?
Well, we'll make it more specific, maybe the family.
Well, I think if we look at the lessons of, certainly in African American families, they've always done it. There have always been constantly negative messages that their children have been bombarded with about who they were, and somehow there was a sense of, you don't go out and believe everything people tell you about yourself. Black children were able to look around and see in their families people who worked despite the fact that, you know, they're told black folks are lazy. You know, and it's important, most of all, for parents to talk to their children. What's most destructive is not just what they see or what they're exposed to, but that nobody talks to them about it, and they can only understand it through the limitations of what children understand. What encouraging children to be all they can be while you prepare them for the obstacles is important. It's not enough just to tell them, well, you know, this world is a racist dog and they're going to hurt you and don't trust people. Then you have to give them some skills to negotiate that, because somehow people have figured out that there are ways of negotiating. So one can do that. in terms of taking that to another level, I think there are, certainly as students, you can address that by way of student and professional organizations, by doing the kinds of things that you're doing, going into your own communities and talking to people, talking to groups of children in schools. Many of you have skills that, you know, you could go back and talk to a kindergarten class of children now about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and what do they think about that? And what does that mean? And, you know, what does it mean to be violent? And is that real? You know, when you blow people up on TV and then you see them an hour later, does that really happen? And how is that different, perhaps, from what happens in their neighborhoods when people get shot but they don't come back? What is going on outside of just what is sometimes a narrow range of what many impoverished children see? Many children in Brooklyn have never been outside the borough. You can go back and take to them information and an awareness of what is around in the broader world, not just what is the limitation of an impoverished environment. But that's how we have done it. That's how we've learned, by going back.
On the reading list that I prepared for you, I have a book by a couple. They're both psychologists, Darlene Powell Hobson and her husband Derek Hobson. The name of it is Raising Black Children in a Race-Conscious Society, Different and Wonderful. Raising Black Children in a Race-Conscious Society. And they try to give us some of those skills that many of us have been able to give to our children, but some of us need help doing it. A lot of kids come up in black families and don't learn how to deal with racism, and we need to do that more effectively, so that's on there. A lot of people are talking about how we need to go back. We heard earlier, I don't remember your last name, but you talked about the spirituality, and the first speaker, Dr. Johnson, about how we need to use our churches much more and go back into our churches and teach our children about our heritage, that can make such a difference in terms of counteracting the negative images that they're getting from the media.
Is this theme only about, is this only an Afrocentric approach? Are we talking about Latin people as well?
Sure, Latin people need to know about their heritage too. You know, we all need to know, and we need to know about each other's heritage. I think that's important. If we just know about black folks, that's not enough either. You know, we need to know about our role in the entire world, and we played a major role.
Yeah, on the question of child abuse, we have a situation where the parents are afraid to discipline their child because the child knows that all they have to do is dial a certain number and the police come in for the mother. What do we do in a situation like that?
The Child Welfare Administration never tells parents that you can't discipline. What we ask you is to apply appropriate discipline. And it's when excessive force and excessive corporal punishment is used that the person gets into trouble. You are right, there's another side to this now. The children are getting very wise, and a lot of calls that we get, they're angry with mommy, and they get on the phone and call in and say, my mother just beat me up. Usually the investigator finds that that's not true, and so you should know that not all cases that are reported ever get to court. You know, the caseworker make that determination there.
Sometimes we have a situation where the parents would rather give in to the child than discipline them in that way because they can't take the hustlers having somebody come and investigate and dig up into their house.
You shouldn't be afraid if you apply appropriate discipline. And you know, we tend, since we live in this very violent society, we tend to hit all the time, slap. You know, and all we're teaching this child is when you get angry is you get physical. That's all we're teaching every time we slap. We should get away from that. Also, people sometimes spoil children, and then when the kid gets like 5, 6, 7, they start, you know, putting the rules down. Discipline begins from birth. The tone of your voice, the look on your face, you know, the body language. You can't be saying to the child, scolding the child and saying, darling, the child gets confused. Children are confused. I feel sorry for children growing up in today's society because everybody that they admire or look up to always in some way let them down. The famous basketball players arrested for drugs. The president says, read my lips, no new taxes. And you hear mommy and daddy raising hell, how taxes are going up and things are getting harder. So the children are saying, why? I mean, who do we emulate? You know, they get confused in terms of what is right and what is wrong and who is the authority figure and who isn't. And they're really growing up in some very difficult times.
But to see an end to this is probably going to be like a long run. I think because, like, for instance, if you raise your child with certain values and standards, he's going to go out and meet other kids that don't have the same values and standards that he has. You know, like you're talking about people in Rikers Island, you're talking about children getting abused and growing up and after 18 being turned out on society. There are women out here who have been raised in good households, but these husbands, and they go and they meet these fellas, and when you're young, you cannot tell a young girl that he's no good for you, or you can't, you know, a mother sees certain things, but when you try to instill this in your child, even though you have brought them up with certain values, there's something else racing within them that they don't want to hear this. So it's like, from what I've noticed, you know, from my experience, is that it's a continuous thing. It's the good versus the evil. It's like it's a never-ending thing. When they go to school, there's not enough people who really care. They tired. They give them a pad and a pen, and they wait for the bell to ring. Then when they come home to mother's maybe single and got to feed the family. It's a whole lot that's, you know,
But we
really
can
involved.
start right here in this room by being better parents and by sort of passing the word to our neighbors and keeping an eye out on children. You know, we can start right here. We can start right here.
Maybe this is a good place to end the formal part of our presentation tonight. This is just the formal part. One purpose of bringing these people here together tonight is to let you meet them on an informal basis. So what I'd like to tell you is that there is a table of literature that they have brought if you'd like to help themselves. And I'm going to invite all of you to have some refreshments in the hall and continue your conversation in this wonderful space.
If you don't have money for the resource manual tonight, Dr. Edwards has them